Now then, you're very welcome back. We are chatting through the Sunday papers. We have with us Dave McIntyre, Virgin Media television commentator, and Mary O'Connor as well, CEO of the Federation of Irish Sport. I know we're just sorting out Mary's line. You're there, Dave?
I am, Joe. How are you?
Great. Good to have you with us. So I'll go through the back pages to kick us off, and we'll start here with the Mail on Sunday. Time to act is the headline. There's a picture of Jadon Sancho in his No Justice, No Peace t-shirt yesterday in the Bundesliga. The subheading, Premier League stars urged to kneel before games in support of anti-racism protests. This is Rob Draper here. Troy Townsend, who is the head of development at Kick It Out, who is also, by the way, father of Andros Townsend, has said, I don't think we need a written statement, but I do think if Premier League players are empowered and they want to kneel, just let them do it. So he's hoping to see protests when the Premier League resumes. That's the back page of the Mail on Sunday. If you're itching to have Premier League back in your life, then a lot of the back pages will give you a cause for much happiness. We have a picture here of Bruno Fernandes and Nemanja Matic at Old Trafford yesterday. There was a game behind closed doors, obviously one in the away jersey, one in the home jersey, having a practice match, and alongside it a picture of Chelsea doing something similar at Stamford Bridge. I think Arsenal played Charlton as well yesterday. They beat them 6-0 at the Emirates. So I guess, in effect, pre-season games are happening at the moment. So game on, United and Chelsea get back into the groove. And then beneath that, Sunday Mirror here saying a transfer exclusive, he's the real deal. Villa star tops Ole's wanted list, it would seem, according to this, that Jack Grealish is the player Manchester United are targeting this summer. The Star then, back in the Old Trafford routine. Again, a picture of Bruno Fernandes and Nemanja Matic at Old Trafford yesterday. Beneath that, the future of football, cap in hand. FIFA President Infantino plans cash talk. This is Gianni Infantino, who is calling for talks on implementing a salary and transfer fee cap in football. Good luck with that one. Sun Sport then, picture of Anthony Joshua. He was at one of the Black Lives Matters protests in London, I'm presuming, over the weekend. Plea to unite against the virus of racism, Anthony Joshua there. And beneath that, well, it would seem that there are, well, I suspect this won't happen, points deductions being talked about here for breaking restart rules, as in Premier League chiefs are going to crack down on football's COVID idiots who break the rules with big fines and possible points penalties. Then we have the Sunday Independent, brilliant picture of Oisin Murphy, 24 years of age, from County Kerry, Killarney, I think, County Kerry, after winning the 2,000 guineas at Newmarket yesterday. Murphy's joy at Guinea's triumph. And then alongside that, a piece by Tony Evans. Fans will stay home when top flight games return. Tony Evans here writing a rebuke to the authorities who suspect fans will turn up outside stadiums, and says that it's just a continued lack of faith in fans. So he has no doubt that fans won't show up outside Premier League grounds. And then beneath that, Carlow football left shocked by O'Brien's early departure. Sunday World, United have eyes on Kai. This is the 20-year-old Bayer Leverkusen starlet, Kai Havertz, £70 million sterling mark. It seems Manchester United and Real Madrid like the look of him and they're interested. And then back page of the Sunday Times, the road back to Croke Park. GAA roadmap sparks optimism that the games will return at the end of next month, writes Michael Foley. They are your back pages. Dave McIntyre, there is a degree of normality to some of those photos once again.
Yeah, there really is. It seems like it's been an absolute age, isn't it, since we've been able to talk about actual live sport, or the prospect of live sport, and previewing games and talking about what players might achieve and who might go where. So it's taking place in small steps, and I know we're probably going to get into that, in that there are certain people who believe we aren't taking these steps quickly enough, and there are others who believe we're coming back to normality a bit too quickly. But I'm definitely excited by what is in prospect over the next couple of months. We'll hopefully have a bumper few weeks and months of sport ahead of us. It's something to be really excited about.
Mary O'Connor with the CEO of the Federation of Irish Sport. Mary, great to have you back. What input has the Federation of Irish Sport had into the return to sport and the jobs, I suspect, which are at risk, and all these decisions happening at the moment?
Thanks for having me on. On the 18th of May, we submitted a call for a resilience fund to be accompanied by a task force, and obviously the return to sport is the priority, but we need to be prudent, we need to be patient, and we need to ensure that the responsibility that's handed over to the first dozen sports on the return to sport is complying to ensure the safety of all participants, and then hopefully we'll get back to some type of normality. But unfortunately, there's just such uncertainty regarding COVID-19. We have to exercise caution and patience, and it's a difficult time for everybody in sport. Obviously, sport is a huge driver of the economy as well here, and sometimes that's taken for granted or even ignored sometimes. So it's an important time for Irish sport. It's important that sport is supported, and we'll be looking on the government to bring out a resilience fund for sport.
Okay. Dave, let's jump in with a few of the pieces. We'll come to Mary's points on the return to sport later on, but the Black Lives Matter movement right across the States has been, well, quite extraordinary over the last 12, 13 days. Continued protests, unrest, Donald Trump managing to make the situation about 1 trillion times worse, almost it would seem, each passing day. And then it has spread very much globally, and sport has been a part of the story. We've seen Roger Goodell and the NFL apologise, sort of. We have seen Jadon Sancho, amongst others, in the Bundesliga leading protests. We saw numerous players take knees yesterday. Here on the back page of the Mail on Sunday, Rob Draper, Premier League stars urged to kneel before games in support of anti-racism protests. This is, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Troy Townsend. He's the father of Andros. He's part of the Kick It Out group, and he was saying, absolutely, let them have a moment, let the captain speak before the game about it. We've seen the likes of Liverpool, Chelsea, Newcastle, Leicester already releasing pictures of their squads kneeling in solidarity. I mean, these are always strange conversations, because in many ways these are just sports people like anybody else, and yet their views are amplified so much via social media and the platform that they have. So they do have incredible influence in this regard.
Yeah, they do. And it is good to see particularly younger guys like Jadon Sancho having the courage of his convictions, and not only to get his message across once, but then backing it up, doubling down on it when he played for Dortmund yesterday, and making the effort to show people that this is something that is going to have to be kept going, and it's just not a once-off. But I would have an issue with the fact that it's, again, just individuals that are going down this road. I would doubt Jadon Sancho has been encouraged to behave in this way by anybody. He has taken this on himself, and he's showing how things can be done if someone has the courage to actually go about it on an individual basis. And as you said, there were players up and down the leagues yesterday taking the knee. But at what stage will it go beyond just individual players? When will it become a collective thing? And when will these collective movements be backed by the administrators and the governing bodies? That is the key to it here. And you mentioned the NFL and Roger Goodell, and the NFL have obviously not covered themselves in glory at all by the manner in which they've approached this subject over the last few years, particularly since 2016 when Colin Kaepernick began making his protest on the sidelines. But it shouldn't just be down to these players. Yes, they are in a position where social media allows them to use their influence. They are role models. It's great that they're showing the way to younger people who mightn't be as educated as they could be in these matters. But the fact that we have seen so little from FIFA, from UEFA, from the FA, from the Premier League, and the administrative bodies across a whole host of sports forever really on this subject, not just in recent years. That's where this needs to change. And all week we've been hearing about people describing the murder of George Floyd as a turning point. And Ed Moses in the Sunday Times with David Walsh mentions it today. Well, I hope that's true, because this has been an issue long before what happened to George Floyd took place in the last week. It's been going on for hundreds of years. It's been in the media for most of the last 40 or 50 years. But we only seem to talk about it when something major like this takes place. And my fear is that this sense of perspective that we have right now will be lost in the weeks and months ahead, and that there's always a danger that we end up exactly where we started prior to the death of George Floyd. Well,
it's just what happens, isn't it? It always blows over. I mean, that is the very point with these things. I was watching a brilliant documentary. It's on the Now TV pass, if you're looking for it, and it was just charting the 1950s/60s when the civil rights movement really kicked off in a big way. You know, started in many ways with Rosa Parks in Alabama and not moving from her seat on the bus, and then the bus boycott started. That was led by a 26-year-old Martin Luther King, and then through the 60s, just the constant agitation for very, very simple things, i.e. Voting registration and the right to apply for certain jobs. And even then, in I think it was 1963, 64, I hadn't realised this, but the protests were getting people nowhere. And the parents in, I think it was Montgomery, allowed their children, young teenagers, to go on the protest march because they suspected police brutality would happen again. But that wasn't making headlines at that stage. And the photo on the front page of the New York Times was of a very young, a teenager, 14, 15, black American child, and there was a policeman setting the dog on him and biting him in the stomach. And this was the picture the next day in the New York Times, which prompted John F. Kennedy to do more and gave him the political license to do more. And you would think that scenes like that are of a bygone era, and then you fast forward however many decades we are here, and George Floyd happens. You know, Tiger Woods this week came out and talked about the LA riots of '92, and here we are 30 years later. So, of course, it will blow over in many ways, Dave, and that is unfortunately the point. So it's always difficult. There's no end point with these conversations, I think. It will blow over for a while, and then something else will happen and it will mushroom up again. I don't see how it can go any other way.
Well, isn't that the most, I'm not saying you're wrong, but isn't that the most disheartening, depressing view that you can possibly take of what's gone on over the last week? Because what is it all for? What are the protests for? What are the overreactions from the police forces about? The fact that there are some policemen being fired at on the streets, there's shops been looted, entire streets and cities are being set alight. Is it all in vain? And will we have forgotten about George Floyd in 6 months' time? And will it go down, as you say, the exact same route as what happened in LA in the early 1990s and any number of other incidents you can think of? Because there's always a reaction. Some are more extreme than others, depending on the nature of the incident. But soon enough, the story moves on. And so many African Americans will attest to that things will stay the same until the next incident. So what can possibly be done to make sure that this actually is a turning point? It's Well, I think it's down to the ordinary citizen to effect a change.
Yes, no,
because
and
certainly
it always has been.
in America, they're not going to get it from their leadership.
Yeah, it always has been.
Obvious.
There are very simple things they could do with, for a start, the training of police officers, which it turns out is just completely different from state to state, the number of weeks that they have to put in training. There are massive discrepancies there. The unions are obviously incredibly powerful, but the effective immunity that police officers have over there, and some of their regulations around what they're allowed to do in terms of chokeholds and various other measures, they could all be changed overnight, but it just doesn't seem to happen. It's really hard to understand. Mary, there is, as Dave said, from a sporting perspective, there is the reaction of various individual players. And then, as Dave also referenced, there are, the NFL, in Oliver Holt's piece on page 77, he talks about these corporate behemoths, which is what they are, and he says the apologetic contortions of Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, hit the right note, but let us not be under any illusion. This is a battle for the brand. Goodell kept quiet when Colin Kaepernick, the former San Francisco 49ers quarterback, was drummed out of the league, his career ruined by a cabal of NFL owners for peacefully protesting against police brutality. And you do wonder, he talks about Goodell went full-on contrite on Friday. It does ring hollow, really. I mean, we're talking, this was very obvious to everybody 2, 3, 4 years ago when Colin Kaepernick started making these points, and now Roger Goodell suddenly had a road to Damascus moment. I mean, I don't think that suddenly happened. I think this is about the brand.
I mean, I don't think anybody sees that comment from Goodell as anything but superficial and populist. I think Oliver Holt's article today is excellent. He speaks about what normal is, and following on from Dave's point about, that unified approach. It shouldn't take individual players, but maybe it takes individual players to start that and to get their organizations behind them. But, it's an excellent article, but there's 2 paragraphs in it where he speaks about what normal is, and it's about UEFA fining Bulgaria less for their fans' financial abuse of England players last year than they fined former Denmark forward Nicholas Bentner for his underpants sponsorship at Euro 2012. I mean, that's where we're at, and that's, a sad indictment of the sport, but also of society in general. It is endemic in society. But Oliver Holt is speaking about actions beyond gestures, and, some of the points he makes are quite relevant. Their importance. If the tragedy that happened in America doesn't spark a real change in what we are in control of. And I think it goes back to what change is. People are threatened by change, but I think there's a huge responsibility on individuals and organisations now to take this on and not to let it blow over, to ensure that this is, in our mindset when we're thinking, diversity is important, and I think we need to be active around this point for a long time to come. Yeah,
it's true, and that part of Ollie Holt's piece is really strong, where he lists out various examples of normal. Normal, as you gave another example. He also says normal is UEFA fining Manchester City more for being a minute late for the second half against Sporting Lisbon than they fined Porto for racially abusing City players in another game. And he goes on to list tons of these examples and says we need, sport needs to fix this as well. You fix it by promoting more black executives to football boardrooms. You fix it by tackling that supporting sore of the chronic underrepresentation of black managers in the English game. You fix it by empowering black players to walk off the pitch when they're racially abused. And we had John Barnes on the show a couple of weeks ago before the death of George Floyd, and he was even talking about that English game in October and wondering why the English players didn't walk off the pitch. They went through the first 2 of 3 protocols and didn't go through the third one. And he asked, why didn't they walk off? It made no sense to him. The abuse continued in the second half. So these are the issues which football has to grapple with. In The Sun, by the way, Darren Bent talks about the atmosphere in English Premier League dressing rooms. He says it's really, very up until very recently in his career, maybe till he was 28, 29 years of age, but up until that point, he felt that there was humour in the dressing room that was just racist, and there was no other phrase he could put on it. And English dressing rooms need to think about things. But Dave, if we look closer to home, because we can be complacent here, Eamon Sweeney on the back page of the Sunday Independent. Black lives should matter here too. Give us a sense of what he's talking about in this article.
Well, it's a question of being able to point the finger at ourselves, Joe, and that's what Eamon's trying to get to the kernel of here, and there's another piece in the main section of the Sunday Independent where the question is, does Ireland have a problem with racism? And of course the answer is almost certainly yes. And this is where the ordinary citizen comes in, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that we are, and the 3 of us, for example, on this call here, we are privileged white people. And no matter how much we try to empathise with people of colour in this country, we'll never be able to truly get a feel for what it is like to be a person of colour in Ireland. And some of the issues that black people in this country, for example, have to deal with just walking down the street or going into the pub or taking part in a game of Gaelic football, they are issues that we will never have to deal with. So protesting is one thing, hand-wringing is an utterly useless reaction. We have to actually understand what the issue is. And I think Eamon Sweeney is trying to get to the nub of that. It's very difficult for someone who has no real experience of what it's like for these people to be able to do anything other than stand up for them. And I think if you're on a bus or you're in a pub and you hear somebody being verbally abused, racially abused, it is on us to actually be able to be brave enough to stand up and call it out, even if it's just with your friends over a WhatsApp group. And there's use of racist terms, or there is what Darren Bent describes as humour going on. We have to be able to say, do you know what, lads, I actually don't think we can use that word anymore. I don't think it's fair on us. I don't think it's fair on our children. And it's definitely not fair on the people that it is patently offensive to. That's going to be something that has to change. And that's something that we can do ourselves, starting today.
Yeah, he mentions a piece that Arthur O'Dea did last week. It's on the Off the Ball website. It's really well worth reading. It's an interview with Gina Akpe Moses, who talks of her hurt when, after she won medals for Ireland, online racists, right, Eamon Sweeney would declare, why do we have her? She's not Irish. Her name doesn't sound Irish, etc. He says there's a long and sorry history of racism in Irish sport, and goes on to list numerous examples. Mary, I know you picked out this piece as well. What jumped out to you?
Yeah, obviously an excellent piece by Eamon, but, obviously, again, topical, but it just shows he gave a cross-section of examples across Irish sport of incidences of racism and so on. But he's a really good paragraph where he says that there's a complacent assumption that Ireland is free from the kind of racism which sparked the Lives Matters protests in the USA. But Irish sport racism problem merely mirrors that of a society as a whole. And he's right, and he goes on to say that being different in any way can be dangerous in this country. We have the EU's second highest rate of hate crimes against trans people. So it's he put it together really well. But for me, the most powerful statement in it is the comment by Nadia Power, the former athlete, where she says that people need to be more than just not racist, but to be actively anti-racist. If you're making an honest effort to educate yourself and kind of say to yourself, have I done anything in the past, or should I be doing anything to stand up in the future? I think that's exactly it. It goes back again to individual responsibility, and when we all take individual responsibility to educate ourselves, and there's been a lot in the media in the last few days about not asking people of colour to tell us about it, to actually go and find that out ourselves, and I think that's really important as well. But again, it's a really excellent article, and another good article in the Times by David Walsh as well, where he interviews the former athlete Edwin Moses about his experiences of racism, and how only that David brought up the racism with him in recent times, although he knew him for the last 20 years. So that tells its own story, that he didn't feel the need to bring it up in the past. But George Floyd's tragic death, kind of made him think about that again.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Joe, that
Dave.
Eamon Sweeney's very clever in that so much of the stuff that we hear the week is anecdotal, but Eamon Sweeney has introduced actual hardcore statistics into it, where, for example, there's a number that he includes in his piece where an appalling 21% of people from a sub-Saharan African background had experienced 6 or more physical attacks due to their ethnicity in the 5 years preceding the survey. Those numbers are absolutely horrifying, and they should rock everyone to their very core.
That jumped out at me as well. That was exactly what jumped out at me. I think if you asked Irish people, they would have no sense of that number. So this is 3 years ago. This is a survey by the European Union Fundamental Rights Agency. Ireland had the highest rate. We are number 1, the highest rate of hate crimes against African people in the EU. And as you said, 21%. So a fifth of all sub-Saharan African people had experienced 6 or more physical attacks due to their ethnicity in the 5 preceding years. That shocked me. I can't believe that's true. So we're not reporting it well enough either, Dave, I would think, is the point.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could probably say that about almost all crimes in this country, where the vast majority of people might just see something minor and not bother reporting it. Maybe there's a fear that they may be targeted themselves. Maybe there's a fear that the resources aren't there for anything to be done about it. That's probably a different strand to the debate. But it goes back to individual responsibility. Would you step in if you saw or heard somebody being abused racially? Are we going to be able to change the culture? 30 years ago in this country, you weren't really frowned upon if you took a few pints and then got into the car and drove yourself home. Now it is absolutely abhorred nowadays. And that's the position we need to get to, where the culture has changed to an extent that you are an outcast if you are seen or heard to be racially abusing somebody or discriminating against somebody for the colour of their skin. And I would encourage anybody, next time you are on a bus and you hear somebody been spoken to in a way that is clearly unacceptable, if you remain silent, it is almost a silent nod of an agreement to the fact that what's happening is acceptable. And the person, the victim in that particular incident, they must feel so alone and so isolated when there are other individuals in and around them and nothing is done about it.
Just on that, Dave, as well, the National Sports Policy, when it was launched in 2018, it spoke about underrepresentation in Irish sport, and people who are from an ethnic minority are underrepresented in Irish sport, and there's a real action point now here for Irish sport to ensure that people of ethnic minority can participate in all sport. And I know that from the national governing body of sport and from local sport partnerships, they are trying to ensure that people feel welcomed into sport on a broader base across the country.
Yeah, it's the reality though, isn't it, Mary, that we put together various official measures and regulations and campaigns and initiatives like that, and that is the on-paper written record of what's happening. And then there is the reality of how somebody feels, and it can be just a look, a glance, the nature of how they're welcomed or not welcomed. That's the lived experience.
Yeah. And it only takes one incident to undo all the good work that's going on. I think we need to tell the story better. I think we need to tell the story of our athletes succeeding, not just at high performance level, but in communities as well, and the good work that is being done at grassroots level. And there needs to be more of that storytelling. And obviously, if there's incidents of racism in communities, that story needs to be told as well. but we need to ensure that Irish sport is a welcoming for people of all abilities, of all races and so on. And I think it's an important conversation that sport is having at the moment. But I do firmly believe that, that the opportunity is there now for us all to take responsibility as individuals, as Dave has said, but as organisations that we're involved in as well.
Yeah, I guess going to your earlier point, Dave, that is the opportunity something like George Floyd's death provides, is maybe it accelerates the conversation. It means that we're all talking about it. Like Eamon Sweeney here mentions, in 2008 there was an under-14 football game in Carlow where supporters taunted a 13-year-old. It started when we were doing the warm-up and went on for the whole match, the kid said at the time, and he lists out various other incidents. So here we are, 12 years after that incident. You would hope something like George Floyd's death and the subsequent conversation, even the points you've made about the bus, or if you see it at a match like this, maybe that's the opportunity. I was going to say the value, but you don't want to be glib about a man's death, but maybe that's the opportunity here.
Yeah, look, it's definitely an opportunity. But as we said, we've been given these opportunities many times in the past, and clearly they haven't been taken. You would hope that 12 years on from that incident, and the blood runs cold when you read Tomoga Sabala's account of what happened in that under-14 football game. If this went on for the entire game, there were obviously parents there were adults, there were mentors and coaches. Not one of them stepped in to stop this happening. And I'm not sure how any parent can look themselves in the mirror that evening knowing that they witnessed something like this and did absolutely nothing about it. But so it's the necessity to avoid merely paying lip service to what's going on this week. And there's a lovely anecdote in David Walsh's piece in the Sunday Times, because one of his children asked him, what are you going to write about this weekend? Are you going to touch on the Black Lives Matter movement in your piece on Sunday Times? And he said, I have a relationship with Ed Moses. I'm going to give him a ring and get his thoughts on it. And his son just calls him out on it and says, so you, the privileged white writer, call up the former black athlete, effectively getting him to write your column for you. You then get paid for reproducing the insight he gives, and that's your contribution to the debate. Scornfully knocking his father off the pedestal. And as Walsh says, we only turn to our black acquaintances when we need them, not when they need us. And African Americans have been consistently telling the world about police brutality, not just this week because George Floyd died, but every week for the last God knows how many years. Maybe many of us are only listening this week. Yeah. Will we be listening next week? And the other question is, would we be having any of this discussion? The answer is almost certainly no, if the murder of George Floyd had not been caught on camera. He would have just been another number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, we'll take a short break. We're back with more from Dave McIntyre and Mary O'Connor in a moment.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball. You can now listen to News Talk on your smart speaker. Alexa, play News Talk.
Afternoons are easy with InsureMyVan.ie, Ireland's low-cost van insurance specialist. Get your business back on the road with InsureMyVan's best price guarantee. For super savings, visit InsureMyVan.ie. City Financial Marketing Group Limited, trading as InsureMyVan.ie, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
While we need to stay apart for now, the team at the Europe Hotel and Resort Killarney looks forward to welcoming friends old and new when the time is right. The epic mountains, stunning lakes, and the Kingdom of Kerry will be here waiting for you, and so will we. Our thoughts and gratitude are with the brave people on the front line, striving to make Ireland a safer place. From our team to yours, thank you. The Europe Hotel and Resort Killarney. A stay with us stays with you forever. Visit theeurope.com.
Whether you're looking forward to visiting family and friends, or driving just for the joy of getting behind the wheel again, you'll find Peugeot as the perfect SUV for making those memorable journeys all the sweeter. The new Peugeot 2008 compact SUV, the full-size 3008 and the 5008 with 7 seats as standard, and all with our unique iCockpit interior. Take a test drive at your nearest dealer or visit Peugeot.ie. Peugeot, unboring the future.
Whatever else changes, looking after baby is still top of every parent's list. With everyday savers from Dunnes Stores, we've got cooling and soothing baby wipes, only 95 cents. Skin-friendly super absorbent newborn nappies from €1.39. And baby dry nappies designed for comfort and long-lasting dryness from €2.79. Plus, with our grocery voucher, you save an additional €10 on every €50 you spend. Everyday savers from Dunnes Stores. Always here for our customers, always better value. Terms and conditions apply, minimum spend required.
COVID-19 has had a huge impact on our country. But thanks to your patience and sacrifice, many thousands of lives have been saved. And while the virus is not yet gone, we have made enough progress to enter phase 2 of reopening Ireland. It's important that we continue to work together to support each other and our communities. To stay safe, you need to limit where you go and limit the number of people you meet. Here are 5 things you should know for phase 2. 1. You may travel within your own county and up to 20 kilometres from home if crossing county boundaries. 2. Indoor or outdoor social gatherings of up to 6 people and outdoor training activity for up to 15 people are now permissible, while always maintaining social distancing. 3. All retail is reopening, but please shop safely, shop locally, and support businesses in your community. 4. Working from home must continue wherever possible. 5. Please walk or cycle if possible, and only use public transport if absolutely necessary. As Ireland opens up, please remember that social distancing, coughing and sneezing etiquette, and washing your hands regularly are really important things we all must do to make sure the virus does not spread. Stay safe, stay local, we are in this together. Full details of phase 2 are available now at gov.ie/phase 2. Supported by the Government of Ireland.
Here's to our local independent businesses. For the last few months, they have been adapting and surviving, finding new ways to serve our communities. At Bank of Ireland, we're doing our bit. And because your financial well-being is our priority, our dedicated business teams can help you take the next step. So we can all keep tapping, clicking and collecting. And one day, getting back to what we all do best. We can, we will, begin. Bank of Ireland is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
From the apartment in the city to the cottage in the country, at Energia, we're the power behind 250,000 customers across Ireland. And right now, there's never been a better time to join us and save on your electricity and gas with our cheapest dual fuel bundle. Wherever you're living, know you always get the biggest savings by coming direct to us. Go direct to energia.ie and switch today. Energia, the power behind your savings. EAB €1,364 based on average annual usage. 12-month contract, discounted unit rates, standing charge, PSO levy and carbon tax, T's and C's and early termination fee apply. Valid from June 2020 and subject to change. Verification and T's and C's at energia.ie/EAB.
In this week's Sunday Independent, explore the world around you with the first of 3 great posters featuring Irish garden birds, butterflies and wildflowers, free to collect. OTE's Brian O'Donovan reveals the family man behind the reporter in Trump's America. Best-selling author Eamon McGlysett compiles a must-read A to Z of normal people. And in sport, Mícheál Muircheartaigh reflects on his legendary life and times. The Sunday Independent. Real stories worth paying for in print or subscribe at independent.ie.
The deficit should start to be reduced. 12 hours of negotiations took place between Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Greens yesterday. The 3 party leaders are meeting this afternoon to try and resolve any outstanding issues. Fianna Fáil's Deputy Leader Dara Calleary is confident they can be overcome in the next week.
Where there are severe blockages, the leaders will discuss those today and we'll get back to discussing them tomorrow. So I think that we can reach that deadline. There's going to be a lot of hours, an awful lot of time spent in the next 48 hours, but there's no new issue that people haven't had a view of. I think we've made a lot of progress, even in the areas that are not signed off.
Police in Derry City say a handgun found in a dissident Republican weapons hall could be the one used in the murder of journalist Lyra McKee. A command war bomb and a stash of ammunition were also found and removed safely after police searched land in the Ballymagroshy area. The PSNI says there's a strong possibility the weapons belong to the new IRA. Here's Derry City and Strabane District Commander Emma Bond.
The weapon found appears to be of the same type and calibre of the weapon we believe was used to murder Lyra McKee. However, I want to be very clear, at this time we are not in a position to say whether this is the murder weapon.
The median number of close contacts for a person with COVID-19 has gone up in the past couple of days. Figures from the HSE show it's now more than 3, despite the figure falling to 2 last month. The data also shows 17% of people in the past 7 days who requested a test for coronavirus had to wait more than 2 days. And a plan to fine drivers more money the faster they were going has been scrapped. It's reported the proposal that got approved by Cabinet last November will not now go ahead after there was no push for it in government talks. It would see drivers going more than 30 kilometres above the speed limit hit with a €2,000 fine. Conor Faulkner from the AA says it would have led to legal argument.
Deeply impractical, I would suggest, with few winners other than solicitors. You can imagine a scene where a court is having to debate whether you were doing 99 kph or 101 kph and a material difference hanging on the outcome.
It's 2 minutes past 2.
News Talk Weather.
Thanks to the AA. For our lowest car insurance price guaranteed, go online to the aa.ie.
Dry today with just a few showers in places, some sunny spells later, and highest temperature is 12 to 18 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
You're welcome back. We're chatting through the Sunday Papers. We have Mary O'Connor, CEO of the Federation of Irish Sport, and Dave McIntyre of Virgin Media Television going through the papers. You both picked out Wayne Rooney's article, page 24 of the Sunday Times. Mary, do you want to start us off? What's Wayne Rooney talking about this week?
I think Wayne Rooney's articles have been a revelation to me anyway. He's speaking about captaincy, how it means a lot of work, there's a responsibility, but also gives an opportunity. So he breaks the article up into what he perceives as the importance of the captaincy. He's speaking about the captain setting the tone, the captain and the player's voice, how the players come to him, how the captain sets the culture, also about being on the pitch and making decisions. It's a really good article. Anybody aspiring to be a captain is well worth to read, but it gives a real kind of insight into his mind and his thinking, and obviously then how he matured as a player and how he learned from other captains that he was exposed to. Really excellent piece. I really like the piece around the culture, how he used that aspect of for when it came to Manchester United, that they had installed a camera system to help with drug testing and scans their face and logs their arrival at training ground. But he saw it as a chance to improve their timekeeping and decided any player not in by 9:30 would be fined. But the part I really liked was when he went to DC United and he was going to become the captain, but the team were already on the road at that stage. And for the first 2 weeks, he was training with the under-18s, and he decided he was going to make a statement to those under-18s. So he was saying that he was first in all the running. He was going around after training, picking up the footballs, collecting the cones, trying to set an example for the next generation of players coming through at DC United. Really thought that was an excellent piece and really insightful.
Roy Keane was vocal, he says, when he's talking about his best captains. He had an aura. I remember my first United training session thinking, I need to impress him, not the manager, him. I was at United when he gave his infamous MUTV interview, but I disagree with how it's portrayed. Roy was supposedly too critical of his teammates, but I've watched the video. There's nothing wrong with it at all. He said the players can't pass the ball 10 yards and they're playing for Manchester United and it's not good enough. Well, he's right, which was a good line as well. I don't really think of Wayne Rooney as a captain, Dave. I mean, you read this and it suddenly it hits you. He's captained Manchester United, he's captained Derby, he's captained England, and I never see him in those terms.
Yeah, he's been a captain at every club he's been with, and he's obviously captained his country as well. Like, briefly, just on that final paragraph in the article about that interview that Roy Keane gave to MUTV, ostensibly that was what led to Keane's departure from Manchester United, that he was essentially told, look, by Alex Ferguson, we can't have this going on, and maybe now is the time for us to part ways. And if I'm sure Wayne Rooney wasn't the only player that got footage of that interview and thought to himself, he's absolutely right, and yet this was ultimately what led to Keane being shown the exit door. That's just an interesting aside on it. But extending it beyond just this piece, these articles that he's been writing in the Sunday Times, these columns, have displayed a level of maturity that I never associated with Wayne Rooney. One of the images that I have of Wayne Rooney is leaving the field in that group game at the World Cup in South Africa, bellowing into the camera at the England fans, essentially, after a poor performance, and talking about how they wouldn't even be good enough to support their own players. And there are various images of Wayne Rooney in compromising positions over the years that led people to accuse him of not taking his career seriously enough, not working hard enough, not having enough sympathy for other people. And while some of this article could be construed as a little bit self-serving, I was fascinated by it. And they're very specific, easily digestible examples of steps that he took off his own back to help others in the role of captain at the various clubs he's been at. It's well worth the read. He talks about one of the clubs he was at where a lot of the players had an issue with the manner in which the manager was training them. And they asked him to go to the manager and tell him the training's just not good enough. And word for word in the article, it's not an easy one, Rooney says. You have to go to the manager and say, excuse me, gaffer, the lads think you're training shit. It can be a lot to take on. And it's an insight into the role of a captain in a football team, because some people might see the armband as a ceremonial object and the role as nothing more than ceremonial, as opposed to something like cricket, for example. And Rooney talks about the test captain in cricket, where you're setting fields and you're deciding who's going to bowl and when, and you're in discussions with picking the team with the selectors and the batting order and everything. Obviously, you never have to go through any sort of that detail as a football captain. But he talks about being on the field and changing the formation without talking to the manager, moving players into different positions, having to know exactly what the role of each player was so that you as the captain can know whether they're doing it well or not. It's an insight into his mind that I never thought was a thing with Wayne Rooney. A level of maturity that he isn't just showing now into his mid-30s, but that was clearly there well into his early 20s.
Yeah. And he has a bit of a pop at the FA in certain parts as well, which is kind of interesting. Like, he talks about the game between France and England. Remember the replayed game after the Parisian attacks of 2015? And going into the press conference around then, he says, I remember sitting in the office with Roy Hodgson and Martin Glenn disagreeing with the FA's briefing. They didn't want the players to talk about what had happened in Paris. And Rooney said, this is ridiculous. Like, we're human beings. We just have to talk about it. And also, and this maybe ties in with your self-serving point, Dave, people remember the pictures at the Grove Hotel of Rooney where I think he had crashed a wedding, or certainly he just gets mixed up with the crowd that were there already. And he's clearly off his face drunk. Like, he's having a great time. And he says on the one hand, look, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But equally, he says, I was given a break by England. I wasn't even meant to be in the squad for the friendly on Tuesday against Spain. I was given permission. Some players headed to London. I knew that would get me more attention if I went into London, so I stayed in the hotel. And he says, in fairness, look, I've said he was drunk. I don't know if he was drunk or not. I can't say that. He said, I stayed with a few others, including staff, and had a drink. And that's all he says about, his state or whatever. And there were loads of pictures about him. We've all been caught in a photo where we don't look the best. I'll give him that. But he says, on reflection, I could have made a different decision. But he said, interestingly, what followed was over the top. In the aftermath, the FA was too scared of the reaction to defend me. And so the coverage went way overboard. I had to be strong and deal with the situation. I've dealt with it my whole career. So there's a few points in this piece where he has a bit of a pop at the FA and how they try and manage players or don't defend players, which was interesting as well. So that's Wayne Rooney, page 24, Sunday Times. He's been doing a really good job. What he has been doing is he's picked out a topic. Like, some weeks it's forward play. A couple of weeks ago it was like the unsung heroes in the team, and he gives his memories and experiences of those particular subjects, and they've all been really good, I have to say. So he's done it again, page 24 of the Sunday Times. Return to GAA we should touch on. So if you take, for instance, the Mail on Sunday, and this is just a small piece, but it ties in with the overall picture. GAA optimistic fans will attend games in 2020. This is Shane McGrath, who writes that there are firm hopes within the GAA that matches will take place before spectators this year. Mentions that the ban on 5,000 people gathering ends at the end of August. Championship's not due to start before October 17th. But it is accepted that the threat from the virus could have changed come autumn. Tom Ryan said on Friday night that playing matches without fans did not appeal. John Horan said as well, it would be our hope to have attendances at games. He said this on Friday. It may mean we use restricted venues for inter-county championships. So, Mary, the GAA have not ruled out even fans attending some of these games, which even 2 weeks ago, I would have thought was an impossibility.
Yeah, look, it goes back to my point earlier. It's just the uncertainty of this. The GAA have had to take a leadership position on this, but it's very difficult to look beyond and see ahead for us. Obviously, as I said already, some sports are back and how they pan out, but we all want Gaelic games back. It's our indigenous sport. I would actually commend the GAA on the work that they have done. People might say that they've taken the conservative view, but I think they have to. They are in every community in the country. It is the most participated in sport, and look, obviously we all would like to go and see the games at inter-county level and at club level, but it's a difficult road to navigate, and you're never going to please everybody. Obviously, you have inter-county managers who are screaming for the activities to come back. You've got the club players where 97-98% of our playing population are at. So it's a very difficult road to navigate, as I said. But look, at the end of the day, we want to see our Gaelic games in the flesh. That opportunity to actually go and watch games is what the GAA is about. That's a community. It's about actually meeting your friends, that social side of it as well. And that's been taken away for the most part this year. And I think there's a real hope there. And I do believe that every effort will be made to ensure that that we get that opportunity. But we must always remember this is a national health emergency, and we can't forget that. Even how much badly we want our sport back.
Yeah. Dave, it's probably exemplified by Colin O'Rourke and Joe Brolly on the same page in the Sunday Independent saying different things.
Yeah, it really is. One article sitting atop the other, and they are wildly different in their opinions in this. Colin O'Rourke, in fairness, he has not deviated from his stance on the length of time it's taking the GAA to reopen their facilities. He's been banging the same drum for weeks now, and he's doubled down on it every time he's been called upon to write his column. And he's obviously in a position where he's an educator as well, and he's deeply embedded within the club system and GAA. So he certainly has plenty of information with which to write his columns. But he feels the roadmap that was published by the GAA on Friday is still far too conservative. And why, for instance, he's asking, are the GAA only allowing 10 players to train together from the 29th of June when the government guidelines this week allowed for groupings up to 15 to train it collectively as of tomorrow? So he feels on two counts the GAA are being far too risk averse. He goes through the numbers as well in terms of who's been affected by COVID, and we've been through this 100 times. We know that young people are nowhere near as at risk as some of the members of the older population. But then he extends that to individual counties. I didn't know this myself, but it's interesting. Kerry, Sligo and Donegal, for example, have had no new cases in almost 3 weeks. I was not aware of that. So he's wondering, could it be safe for activity in those counties to resume and maybe keep Dublin, for example, as a closed shop while allowing other areas to reopen until Dublin can hit those same numbers? I'm not sure which side of that argument I come down on, but it's certainly an interesting one. The GAA obviously want to feel like they're all in it together. They're members across all 32 counties. They don't want to be seen to be favouring one area of the country over another. But it's a question maybe that does need to be asked.
Mary, where do you stand on it?
Look, I mean, obviously, from my point of view, what I can say regarding the age groups he's quoted in terms of where the loss of lives have been most prevalent is obviously in the older age groups. But I think there needs to be an understanding that if I as an adult take a decision to go back to club training or into county training, and I'm a healthy individual, I still might be going home to elderly relatives, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, and so on. And just because I might have signed a waiver and I'm healthy, I mean, my closest and dearest did not sign that either. So there's a health risk there as well. But look, taking the point, about activities, and, I think you couldn't have one county go back and another county not go back. I think that's not realistic. Look, obviously young players, and he makes a very good point, and I do agree with the point around young players who might be on the edge of playing Gaelic games or actually just not stopping playing altogether, that there's a real chance there that they mightn't come back. So that needs to be looked at. Absolutely, I agree around that. But I will always go back to the point that this is a nationwide problem. It's a European-wide problem. It is about the health of our country. And I think, he has been consistent in his articles since this has happened. But I wouldn't agree that the GAA have been conservative in the sense that they have to make decisions based on what the information that they have. And I think that, Colm has an amount of information, but doesn't have it in its totality. But also I would say is the government came out with their statement on Friday afternoon, and the GAA had set their roadmap to come out after that statement. So look, I mean, there's nothing that doesn't mean that it can't be changed or looked at again. But I think they had to be prudent and err on the side of caution on this issue.
Yeah. Joe Brawley writes, Colin O'Rourke has bemoaned the fact that pitches were always closed and remain closed, and as always his message is powerful and deserving of close attention, and I would agree with that. But I would disagree with him on this general stance over the last couple of weeks, respectfully disagree. I think I would far rather the GAA were too cautious and too safe rather than sorry, and I think it was the right thing to do. We don't know enough about this virus. We don't know enough about transmission from young people to older people. I take his point about certain counties, but the GAA is a nationwide organisation. I wouldn't argue too strongly they couldn't be more flexible in terms of certain parts of the country, perhaps. But in broad terms, that they have been very cautious, and this strikes me as only a good thing. And on June 29th, he says there'll be a limit of 10 players for all training sessions. And he says, well, you know, why don't we have the 15 if that's allowed? But like, I mean, if you love football and you just want to have a kick around and get a sweat on, I don't really think it matters if there's 15 or 10. You know, there are inter-county teams doing bits in small groups at the moment, and there's no complaints from them. They're happy, they're keeping fit, they're kicking ball around, and equally they're not going home to families feeling guilty and wondering, oh, am I putting somebody in my family in jeopardy? You know, rules of how many degrees, 6 degrees of separation, like there's a reason this thing spreads so quickly. I don't see the need for a rush, you know, because at one point he talks about how it's quite an emotional argument that's thrown at him, you know, about the healthcare workers. But then later on, he makes what I would deem to be another emotional argument where he says, you know, he bumped into a young player last week and asked him if he was looking forward to getting back into football. The response was not of any great enthusiasm. I said to him, he'd be better off doing a bit of training rather than drinking cans down by the river in a big group. He just smiled because he knew that I knew that those sort of lukewarm players might not bother going back. And this delayed roadmap is the worst thing possible. Sorry, that's not the GA's responsibility. Like, if he's down drinking cans by the river, that's not up to, that's not Tom Ryan's problem. Like, what are his guardians doing? You can't throw that as a thing. We're not. It's not a babysitting service.
And also, I wonder, had he spoken to a player who was desperate to get back to training and had kept himself in great nick, how would that have affected today's column? I wonder, would it have been included? Maybe it would. I don't know, but. He does raise a couple of interesting aspects to the GA's roadmap, and we'll probably not really get a real feel for it until they actually come to pass. But we know now that the return to inter-county training is penciled in for the 14th of September, and until then, clubs will have sole access to their inter-county players. At what point will this be flouted by some counties? Will county boards allow their managers to resume collective training before then? The GAA have said one key aspect of it is that anything that takes place before the 14th of September, while not specifically outlawed, it will not be covered by expenses. So if you are driving 60, 70 miles to training or a 200-kilometre round trip for your county, you won't be able to get the mileage for that. So that's something the GAA have been at pains to ensure that is out there and that everybody involved is aware of it.
Colin O'Rourke does, Mary, make a fantastic point when he says, on the adult side of things, there'll be great fun with the club championships going strong in September and October, and then county managers looking for their players for training. That is an almighty row in waiting. The GAA should have put the horse before the cart, got their inter-county championships going first, while clubs could have had the end of the year. Another decision which is very suspect. What is going to happen when the club championships get up and running across July, August into September, and inter-county managers are saying, well, hang on here, I've got a championship to prepare for? That will be tricky.
Yeah, I mean, tricky is an understatement. It's going to be... look, obviously, there's a huge room for internal conflict within counties, but, you know, I always look at, you look at those clubs who produce maybe 4 or 5 inter-county panellists. They're the ones that are really going to be under pressure, because, you might have a club that have one and they might be able to work around it. But if you have a club who's been really, has been consistently a conveyor belt to inter-county teams of 4 and 5 players, they're really going to be under pressure, because obviously the player's going to be loyal to their club. It's where they're from, it's where they're going to go back to. But then obviously there's a loyalty to the inter-county and, that motivation to succeed at the highest level. And it goes back to the player being put in the middle again. It's going to take a huge amount of work and communication. And I would just hope that, when that does come around, that it doesn't just need to be all aired in public, that these conversations can be had in an adult-like manner, and people can discuss this without having to go out to the public and air their grievances. I think
Mary,
it is going to be difficult.
What are you talking about? We're the media. We want them on here. We want table banging. We want rows. We want to have a month of it.
I know, and I get that, and that was.
No, I'm joking. I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
we want as much dirty laundry out in public as possible.
That makes the world go round, but I think from the purest point of view, these athletes are they grew up in our local communities. They're the people that are role models as well, and they just want to get on with it. But it is going to look. There's no point in saying otherwise. It is going to be a problem. But we know now what the roadmap is. It might be tweaked. The opportunity is now to have discussions between inter-county managers, county boards, and communicate back down to the clubs. It needs to be really prioritised now, because we know what's going to happen. We know what's coming. So really that discussion that goes back to the key point in everything is that communication piece and that organisation piece. Yeah. Well, thankfully, we are talking in this way as opposed to the year being obliterated, and we're quibbling over numbers of training and whether it's 2 or 3 weeks too little or 2 or 3 weeks too late. I mean, ultimately, we're moving in the right direction. That's the good thing. So this time next month, we should be in a fairly decent place, all going well. Let's take a short break. A few more pieces to get through. We're back with Dave McIntyre and Mary O'Connor.
Off the ball on News Talk. Future of Work with Jess Kelly and Gavin McLaughlin.
On the latest Future of Work podcast, we focus on people.
We'll hear how to keep your staff motivated during a pandemic
and the opportunities that exist for rebuilding a company culture.
Future of Work with Jess Kelly and Gavin McLaughlin.
Thanks to Vodafone Business.
On News Talk.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast now at newstalk.com and on the News Talk app.
Afternoons are easy with insuremyvan.ie, Ireland's low-cost van insurance specialist. Get your business back on the road with Insure My Van's best price guarantee. For super savings, visit insuremyvan.ie. City Financial Marketing Group Limited, trading as insuremyvan.ie, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Mattresesdelivered.ie for quality mattresses. But did you know that we're now selling dining tables and chairs, bar stools and gaming chairs with same fast free delivery anywhere in Ireland?
Home. Suala. We're at home a lot these days, but we can still explore with the TG Cahir player. Explore the home of Irish content. Home to award-winning documentaries, home to critically acclaimed series, home to culture, trad music and sport. Explore Ireland from the comfort of your home. Explore the TG Cahir player app. Now available to download for free. Gachaid. Worldwide. TG Cahir. Sunna Suala.
At National College of Ireland, our students are living proof that studying here can help boost your career.
I really wanted to do a master's that would get me a job, and something that NCI advertised on their open day was their really high employment rate after college.
I'm sure the MBA was crucial in my getting a big promotion at work. It gives you an opportunity to step back into learning and to make a real change in your life. I think that NCI gave me a real pathway to success.
It changed my life. Literally changed my life.
Prove to yourself what you can do with our wide range of full and part-time courses at National College of Ireland. Call 1850 221 721 or visit ncirl.ie.
Martin, when are you going to fix that hole in the shed roof?
Don't worry, Jenny, I'm looking into it.
Sure, we've all been looking into it for the last 6 months.
Yeah, but I'm going to an expert.
And how much will that cost?
Nothing. It's an expert hardware store.
Oh?
Not only do expert hardware tell you what you need to fix things, they also show you how to do it.
So can they show you how to unload the dishwasher?
Ah, here, they're experts, not miracle workers. For the best advice on home improvements, find your local expert hardware store at experthardware.ie.
Enjoy unlimited cook-alongs, sing-songs, TikToks, Zoom bombs, stories, streaming, gaming, swiping and sharing with no limits data on Air Mobile. And with our retail stores reopening in line with guidelines, why not drop by and chat to our team? To get no limits data with Air Mobile, call 1-800-500-300, go in store or visit air.ie. Air, let's make possible. Unlimited allowances subject to fair use. Available on selected Air Mobile plans. For full terms, see air.ie.
After months of hard choices, it's time for something else. To choose brighter. Choose a 202 SEAT. Choose to take a 3-month payment break. Choose an online discount voucher of up to €3,000. Choose to pay 0% PCP finance across our entire SUV range. Choose a 3-year service plan for just €9.99 a month. Choose to download your voucher at seat.ie and then visit your local SEAT retailer before June 30th. Choose to have it all at our 202 SEAT sales event. Finance provided by way of hire purchase agreement from Volkswagen Financial Services Ireland, trading as SEAT Financial Services. Subject to lending criteria. Terms and conditions apply. Visit seat.ie for further information.
For many companies starting on the road to recovery, accessing liquidity to sustain their businesses will be a key priority. Enterprise Ireland has a range of funding supports for manufacturing and internationally traded services companies who are impacted by COVID-19. Up to €800,000 is available under the Sustaining Enterprise Fund, and we also offer a €5,000 grant to help you prepare a funding plan. For full details of our supports and advice on how to meet your funding needs, contact Enterprise Ireland's Business Response Unit or your development advisor. Call 01 727 2088 or visit enterprise-ireland.com. An initiative of the Government of Ireland.
Are you ready to get back to business? Do you have the appropriate measures in place? Netwatch can offer a range of services to support you at this time. Whether you need temperature screening, audio alerts to inform people of rules...
Please follow social distancing rules and keep a space of 2 metres between you and other people.
Or you want to manage occupancy levels, Netwatch can help you get back to business. Visit netwatchsystem.com. Netwatch, creating a fearless environment.
Are you concerned about sanitisation for your home, workforce, buildings or vehicles? If you are, Sanity System is an award-winning portable sanitisation system currently being used by business and government agencies. It is available for rent or purchase. Find out more by visiting sanitysystem.ie.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Welcome back, Dave McIntyre with us, Mary O'Connor as well. We're going through the Sunday Papers. Final few stories that caught our eye. Mícheál Muircheartaigh is on page 3 of the Sunday Independent talking to Dermot Crowe. Just extraordinary, really, his career and life. Dermot Crowe starts off by remembering 2010 when David Coldrick blew the whistle in the All-Ireland final, and it was Mícheál Muircheartaigh's last game. He was calling Cork's win over Down. He was 80 years old at that time. He is now pushing 90. And Dermot Crowe has gone out to speak to him on a warm June evening in his back garden in the Meath countryside where he lives, close to Kilcock. And he says not all that much has changed over the last 10 years of his life. He didn't stop going to matches. He still plays golf. He's been climbing mountains. He's been keeping fit through a daily exercise regime. He's often called on by charities and other organisations to lend his voice. Though almost 90, he remains agile, in good health. And over the best part of 2 hours, the stories mostly of players trip off his tongue. And that's the intro. So quite extraordinary, really. There's just loads of great stuff in this. I always love hearing Mícheál Muircheartaigh talking about the time when he coached the Kerry players up in Dublin. It's just such an extraordinary thought and thing, and then he's commentating on them. I mean, you could talk now about how it's like in the most strict observations of journalistic integrity. You know, he's not a disinterested party and all this kind of stuff, but it's the GAA, it's amateur, it's of a certain time, and there's something really beautiful about it. So Muircheartaigh developed a close relationship with Kerry players of the 70s and 80s while training those based in Dublin. Mick O'Dwyer, appointed ahead of the 75 season, the county chairman asked Muircheartaigh to work with the players in the capital. And Muircheartaigh says they were young, but they were very good. Kerry were beaten in the All-Ireland minor by Galway in 1970 in a replay. Galway only got 1 player out of that game. Kerry got 9. And Dermot Crowe writes, the players from Mayo, Leitrim and other counties made up the numbers when they trained. Charlie Nelligan, Jack O'Shea, Ger Power among the Kerry footballers based in Dublin. We had great fun, says Muircheartaigh. There was no big responsibility. I rang Ger, that's the county chairman, said, now these lads are going to be well fed, and they were well fed. They got steaks in the best places in Dublin. And this is my favourite part, really. I'm just building up to this. The last thing we would do every night, most nights, I used to play a bit of golf. I'd have the clubs in the boot, myself and Jack O'Shea, and he could be a good hurler, he could be good at anything. We'd put a ball on the sideline and we'd have a little competition striking it long, and that would be the last thing we'd do. I think there's too much seriousness about training now. The thought, Dave, of Mícheál Muircheartaigh and Jack O'Shea having a long drive competition at the end of training is just, on a summer's evening, is just gorgeous.
With the Mayo players and the Leitrim players looking on. I mean, in what world could this possibly have ever taken place? Everything is just so sanitised now. Everything is so closely and heavily monitored, and every move that these players make is almost prepared in advance. To think that you could have the likes of Ger Power and Jack O'Shea and Charlie Nelligan with nearly 20 All-Ireland medals between them training with Leitrim players and Mayo players by an RTE radio commentator is like something that you would see written in a fairy tale. He goes on to talk about after that 1975, when their breakthrough season, when they beat Dublin against all the odds. Mícheál and Muircheartaigh lived in Blanchardstown in West Dublin at the time, and he says, I remember Mico came out to the house with me afterwards. The players would all be gone to the pubs, and they only went to the team hotel for the banquet later. There's a guy who's probably commentated on the game, and he's heading back to his own house afterwards, and he's got the All-Ireland winning manager in the car with him. It's just incredible. But it's if you have 2 or 3 minutes to have a look at this story today, I'd advise anyone who has the time to do it, because it's like a series of mini stories being told by Mícheál, from Christy Ring to Mick O'Dwyer to James McCartan Sr. And he talks about Kieran McGeeney, and we know what an intensely driven man Kieran McGeeney was and still is in his role as the Armagh senior manager. But he talks about McGeeney captaining Ireland in the International Rules Series in 2003 to victory. And Mícheál was up early the following morning because himself and a couple of others were due to play golf at 7 a.m. And in the lobby of the hotel, he sees McGeeney coming out of the gym. And he says to him, look, you played well. You captained the team to victory yesterday. What are you doing? And McGeeney says, well, the club have a game next Sunday, and he wanted to make sure that he wasn't caught short. And you think of the scenes that Mícheál would have witnessed in the 60s, 70s and 80s, where players would never have dreamt of doing something like that. And there's the likes of McGeeney up at the crack of dawn the following morning to get a workout in before anybody else has even left the lab.
Yeah, he says those Ulster trips changed from when you saw people early in the morning, you asked, instead of asking what bar you were coming back from, you just, I presume you were in the gym. That's the way things changed. And like McGeeney is just so fascinating. When Tyrone beat Armagh in the 03 All-Ireland final, Muircheartaigh noticed McGeeney staying on the field during the presentation. I mentioned it on the radio. The next time I met Kieran, I said, that was a great gesture by yourself. He said, you know why I was there? I don't, I said. I'd say you could be good friends with Peter Canavan, who was getting the cup, I put it to him. I was there, said Kieran, because I made myself suffer. He just wanted to stay there and watch them get the cup, to make himself suffer, to burn it into his memory, I presume, for when he's doing training in winter in the following few months. Mary, what jumped out at you? Sorry, Dave.
I remember just a little story that something reminded me of what McGeeney did there years ago. I was on Hill 16 with a few friends of mine, and this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, and Dublin had just lost a Leinster final to Meath. And this was the time where Dublin could not buy a Leinster title. They went 7 years without winning one. And the lads were all, come on, we head back to the pub now. It's another dark day for the Dubs. And I stayed at the bottom of the hill to see the Meath players complete their lap of honour and come around with the Delaney Cup, so I could experience the pain of what it was like to watch Dublin lose yet another Leinster final. I wanted to suffer because when they did win it, which they did a year later in 2002, it would feel all the more special. So it's probably the only time I've been ever possibly able to compare myself to Kieran McGeeney. I'll probably never be able to do it again. Yeah, well, that's
true. You stayed to give him the finger, let's be honest. That's what actually happened in that. Hurl abuse from the stands. And come here, what would you and Jim Gavin talk about when you drive him home after an All-Ireland final?
Yeah, look, it's farcical, isn't it, to think that ever happened? But I mean, could you imagine it? But he's obviously Mícheál. He hung up the microphone 10 years ago after just an extraordinarily lengthy career. The fact that he commentated on James McCartan Sr. as Down won the All-Ireland in 61, then commentated in 91 and 94 when James Jr. was a player with Down when they won the All-Ireland, and then was in the commentary box for his last All-Ireland final when James Jr. was the Down manager in 2010 when they were beaten by a point by Cork. But the career that we all have, it can never happen again. He can never see the things, hear the things, be involved in the things as a journalist that could never take place with a journalist of the modern day situation, because obviously the access is now completely sterilised and sanitised, and that will never change.
Yeah, a national institution, Mary.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, from my point of view as being a former player, I would take great joy in that, Mícheál Muircheartaigh would have commentated in All-Ireland finals that I would have played in. He was a national treasure. He's something that you associate along with the Artane band on All-Ireland final day. But in the article today, it's really brilliant read. And, what I liked about it, going back to the training of that Kerry team, he was asked, Dwyer send instructions up from Waterville, and Mícheál goes no, because Mico had no instructions for himself, kind of just off the. But what I really liked about this was and I'm being parochial here, was his comments and stories on Christy Ring. One aspect of it, he talks about Bob Hyland, who was a journalist writing articles for the Irish Press during the winter on famous players. After he published an interview with Seamus Bannon of Tipperary, an All-Ireland winner in the 1960s, his next appointment took him down to Cork and to meet Christy Ring. So Mícheál then takes up the story where Christy Ring met Bob Hyland and they were driving in his car, and Ring said to Hyland, "You were talking to that Bannon man from Tipperary, and he said that you need a nice tuft of grass to take a sideline ball." So Bob goes, "Oh yeah, he said that all right." So Christy Ring said, "Stop the car." So Christy Ring himself got out of the car. Christy got a hurley and a slitter. He put the slitter on the road. He stood back and cut the ball and sent it off the ground and sailing into a field. And as he was sitting back into the car, he said to Hyland, "Will you write to Bannon and tell him that the grass never grew on the Mardyke Road?" Just brilliant, you can hear Mícheál telling that story.
Yeah,
he's just a storyteller. He's iconic, that old cliche of a national treasure, but he absolutely is. And I tell you a funny story. A couple of years back, myself and my friend on Good Friday, we're driving down to Dingle. We said we'd climb Mount Brandon, and we were feeling fierce proud of ourselves to go down. And we'd been talking about Mícheál driving into Dingle, and lo and behold, who was walking into Dingle on the side of the road? Only Mícheál. So we pulled in front of him. I'd say he thought we were going to abduct him or whatever. We were just pure joy, and got a photograph taken with him. But he's somebody that I would always remember as being part of Gaelic games and making Gaelic games what it is today.
No, absolutely. That generation of broadcasters in the BBC and RTE were just the voices of their sport, and that'll never happen again.
No.
It's just quite extraordinary. I must admit, for the 90s, Pavlovian dog effect, I just associated Mícheál and his voice would be in Carsick, because on a lot of summers we would just be on the road down to Mayo or different places, and obviously he'd be on, and I used to get car sickness as a kid, and just the heat coming through the window, the bumpy road, and Mícheál's voice were the perfect cocktail. I've grown out of it now, I'm happy to say. It's funny what you remember all these years later. That's on page 3 of the Sunday Independent. 90 years old as well, my God. And he was in he seems to be in great form here. He was on the Late Late Show a couple of weeks ago and in great health as well. So we'll park that. That's well worth checking out on page 3. We have a couple of last pieces to get through. Niamh Fitzpatrick, her name, I was aware of her name, but I hadn't caught her interviewed before, but it's a really great piece on page 22 of the Sunday Times. Niamh Fitzpatrick has been through a lot, and she talks about it in this piece. She started off a sports psychologist, and she started off in GAA terms, Mary, with the Wexford hurling team of 96. Liam Griffin brought her on board when she was in her late 20s. She didn't know a thing about hurling, to be honest, but it proved to be a really popular decision, and she's given a fantastic interview here.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. Obviously, she doesn't hide the fact that she wouldn't be a hurling person, but it goes on to say that the Wexford manager understood the absolute necessity for conditioning of his player's mind, and everything else would flow on from that. And I think, it goes back, obviously it's 24 years ago, but, that time psychology and in Gaelic games would have been associated with being a weakness rather than a strength now. So it goes on to tell the story that one night at training, Griffin said to her, "Come here," he said to me, "run out onto that pitch and run your hands up and down Larry Murphy's leg." So just to kind of deviate away from the fact that she was there, and who was she, that she was there as a physiotherapist, not as a psychologist.
Yeah. It was a media night, and he didn't want the media asking, who's Niamh Fitzpatrick, what's her role? So he told her, go out there and rub Larry Murphy's leg. Because Dennis Walsh interviewed her, and he points out that, I hadn't realised this, that Derry in 93 were the only other team maybe who had a sports psychologist embedded, and nobody in hurling had done it. I would think, Mary, there's not a GAA team, club and county as well, who haven't had some dealings with a psychologist. And I presume every county team has a go-to, almost full-time psychologist for the year at this stage.
Oh, I would say absolutely. They definitely would have one, if not two, whereas at club level you might have some amateur psychologists. But yeah, look, obviously from an inter-county elite point of view, if you're physically prepared to the optimum, you want to make sure that the mind is right as well. And I think it's a given now that every inter-county setup, both male and female, would have access to a psychologist and would be thought of as an essential in backroom teams. Definitely Wexford were ahead of their time, and you know, Wexford had come so close before in the past, and she definitely was an essential piece of the jigsaw. But you know, her reputation stands for itself. You know, she's been the team psychologist for 3 Olympic Games for the Irish team. She's worked with the Irish equestrian team, and obviously she was involved with Mayo back in 2017 under Stephen Ratford as well. So really a well regarded and highly thought of individual. Obviously in recent times had a huge family tragedy with the death of her sister Dara. But it's a really excellent article by Dennis Walsh today.
Yeah, and it's almost hooked on the death of her sister, Captain Dara Fitzpatrick, along with 3 other crewmen, were killed off the Mayo coast when their Coast Guard helicopter came down. I think everybody remembers that a couple of years ago. It was a huge story at the time. And she's written a book called Tell Me the Truth About Loss, and that's going to be published in the autumn. So that's almost the hook for the piece. She says, Niamh Fitzpatrick, of her work as a sports psychologist, and a female one at that, there's something about being the only female in the group, or being one of only maybe 2 females in the group. When I started with Wexford, a fair bunch of those players were older than me. Now when I go into a squad, I'm their mother's age at 51. What's important is that there's a space that they see you in, and it's not a motherly figure. You need to be careful about how you place yourself, which is quite an interesting comment. There are things players tell me that they won't tell their manager because I don't select the team. There's also a male-female thing where maybe there isn't an ego involved for the player and they feel safe to say something to me. So there is that balance. I'm not there as an agony aunt. I'm there to help them find their best performance consistently. And she was with Mayo the year they lost to Dublin in the All-Ireland final by a single point. That was the year after her sister's death. And she says the following year, it seems to have all hit her in that her immune system seemed to just shut down. She had, the grief really hit me physically with my immune system. I spent time unwell. I got pneumonia, really ill, hospitalised. I spent 1.5 years on steroids and antibiotics because I just kept getting sick. And now she's written about the experience of losing her sister, and she mentioned her marriage failed as well around that time. So a hell of a time to come through, but an interesting read, Dave.
Yeah, one aspect that I really was fascinated by, and Mary's already mentioned how Wexford were ahead of their time at that time in the mid-90s. It more specifically was Liam Griffin. In so many aspects of his life, has always been ahead of his time. He's been a pioneer, both in business and in sport. But I'm sure it was his call to get in touch with Niamh Fitzpatrick. And one can only imagine, not only was it a woman that was coming into the Wexford setup, but it was a sports psychologist, neither of which were very common at the time, as you've already mentioned, in and around the senior inter-county hurling and football environment. What would the O'Connor brothers, for example, Martin Storey, Billy Byrne, dyed-in-the-wool, hardy hurling men from the 80s and into the early 90s have made of this development? And it's interesting because she was mentioned in Martin Storey's acceptance speech when he lifted the Liam McCarthy Cup in '96, where Niamh was described as a special friend.
Yeah.
There was still no real words around how to describe exactly what her role was. And obviously it's just come on massively since then. But there's a really touching aspect to her time with Mayo where she was almost enjoying the role with the Mayo footballers as an escape from the difficulty she was having personally, because it's always such a traumatic experience she had to go through with the loss of her sister, Dara. But there was one particular day where she felt almost ambushed by the grief that it seemed to come upon her, having put it to the back of her mind when Mayo were playing that game against Dublin. And it was after they'd beaten Kerry in the replay. And she was alone in the warm-up area, and it came over her in a sudden rush. Some of the Mayo players sensed something was wrong, and one by one, they wrapped her up in hugs. And it's just a beautiful image of these huge Mayo footballers sensing that somebody was in real distress, and they were there for her, where in a mentally stimulating capacity, it was her job to be there for them. That's why she was there in the first place, brought in by Stephen Rochford.
Yeah, it captures a lot about gender roles, doesn't it? Like even there you mentioned the Wexford players and manly men, and I'm not surprised to hear her say that when as individuals, they sat down in front of her, and she says maybe it is the male-female thing, but their vulnerability came out. They're able to talk about their feelings, and, you know, both genders in different ways. I mean, I think we can safely say women more than men have suffered, but both genders have suffered in accordance with their roles. And if you sit down with any man, one-on-one, any friend, one-on-one, talk to them, all the emotions they feel come out, all the vulnerabilities they feel come out, and they absolutely do bottle them up. And I could imagine for men in the 90s, Irish men in the 90s, hurling backgrounds, small clubs, to have an outlet like Niamh Fitzpatrick was an amazing thing in their lives. And I would say Liam Griffin sensed that. And, you know, it's almost like a Trojan horse, you know, GAA in lots of communities, sports psychologists coming in and encouraging them to talk. It was probably the only way a lot of them ever did talk. And I'm not surprised, you go to 2018, I think it's far more acceptable for men to notice that she was in tears and upset and go and hug her and not be bashful about that or embarrassed about that or to show emotion or to empathise with her. And that's all captured in this piece somewhere as well. I haven't directed that at anyone, but I'm just throwing it out there.
No,
Sorry, Joe. Let Mary step in there.
No, I would agree. I think it's obviously, you know, an excellent piece by Dennis, but I think, you know, you're made into county hurler now or even 24 years ago when she was at Wexford, you know, you're not supposed to have those weaknesses, you know. Obviously you want to portray to the manager that you're able for, you know, the high intensity, the performance, the pressure and so on. So the conversations with Niamh would act as a vehicle to let out any emotions that you would have or any doubts that you would have or any niggling concerns you would have. So, you know, that reassurance that, you know, that talking to somebody who's not directly involved in selecting the team is important for any individual. And I think, you know, male or female athletes would love that opportunity to actually be able to convey and make themselves feel in their vulnerability, just tell how they're exactly they're feeling. I think that's a really important piece in modern sport today as well as it was 25 years ago, you know.
There's a tweet in, just for the record, lads. We'll check this out. Just for the record, lads. John O'Mahony had a sports psych working with Leitrim in '92. Top secret at the time. It was totally taboo. I'm sure it must have went on all the time. Sure, the managers were effectively sports psychologists in their own way. Mick O'Dwyer, I suspect, was a sports psychologist in his own way.
Yeah, the Kilkenny players always would have referred to Brian Cody as being a sports psychologist over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last quick story or two then before we go. There's a Brendan Rodgers interview in the Mail and there's Willie McCreary in the Mail as well, actually. So Brendan Rodgers, only the second manager that we know of to have come down with COVID-19. He's fully recovered now. Like everybody else, Dave, literally on the planet, he spent his time watching The Last Dance and then, it seems, recorded a video and sent it to the WhatsApp players group saying, I don't know what you're watching, but if you want a little idea of what it takes to get to the top, then you all should be watching The Last Dance. So Brendan Rodgers with Ollie Holt, pretty good. He has the reputation which Holt touches on for, it's hard to find the terminology sometimes, lacking sincerity. Bluffer maybe. Lacking sincerity is how Holt puts it. There's obviously the Ricky Gervais office comparisons as well, a little bit too cheesy, maybe a little bit too happy with himself, insincere. All of these things have followed Rodgers around. He's building up a very impressive CV now.
Yeah, look, words like insincerity, bluffer, a bit too slick and smooth for his own good, they've all been fired at Brendan Rodgers over the last few years. And I don't think it's been proven that they were all completely misused, because you can't have a sustained period of success across a number of different environments in the way that he has and not have something very positive to bring to the party. It's a perspective, I think, that some people may have had of him that has been utterly changed over the last few years. It's an interesting one because, yes, he was obviously fascinated by Michael Jordan, who was the principal character in The Last Dance, but it's unsurprising that Rodgers was most taken by the role of Phil Jackson, the Bulls head coach, and the skills he displayed in man management, from Jordan, the superstar that was in some ways running the show, all the way down to the rookies in his squad. And someone like Brendan Rodgers, I would say, studies that very closely and can take something from the documentary that he can bring into his own domain of trying to get Leicester to overachieve again, as they did so spectacularly in 2016. And there's also a throwaway mention as well of a £250,000 donation he made to the Northern Ireland Hospice Organisation as well, which Brendan Rodgers is a rich man, but it's still a large amount of money and a donation that he did not need to make. And he's not doing that to allow people believe that he's more sincere than he really is. That is just something that never really needed to be done when he's gone, and he's done that anyway. And I would say that if you speak to any player who's played under him in the last 10 years, it's highly unlikely they'll have anything other than positive things to say about him.
Yeah. Mary, I do sometimes think with Brendan Rodgers, so like he's done a great job everywhere he's gone, really. Like the last season at Liverpool, they suffered in the absence of Suarez. But there's this guy up the road in Antrim who grew up playing Gaelic games long before he ever kicked a soccer ball, who has managed Celtic with aplomb. We don't have that Martin O'Neill relationship with Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, reading the article today, you try and get underneath Brendan Rodgers. Is this the real person? But, I mean, I was quite interested in the article because obviously I only know of him of what the media coverage and so on. But obviously what he has achieved at Celtic, at Liverpool, and now Leicester are fourth in the Premier League, 8 points ahead of United in fifth, and they're in the quarter-final of the FA Cup. I mean, that has to be lauded, especially the tragedy that Leicester, the football club, has emerged from. But he makes one comment today, which I kind of had underlined. I kind of said, yeah, that makes sense to me. He said that you don't have success with players and with teams unless you can be sincere and they believe in you. And that's absolutely right. You look at managers, Phil Jackson's, the Mick O'Dwyer's, there has to be that connection with the players. And I think what he is achieving at Leicester this season is really, really important, but it's substantial as well, when you look at where they've come from. So, I mean, as I said, people can talk about Brendan Rodgers, the person, but as a manager, he is achieving with Leicester.
Yeah.
And Joe, it'd be very interesting to get a Celtic fan's take on Brendan Rodgers from his time at Leicester, because we remember the banner that was held up by Celtic fans when he left Glasgow. You've traded mediocrity or greatness for mediocrity.
Well, and he did a recent interview, I think it was with Keys and Gray over on beIN Sports, where he said members of his family stopped talking to him when he left Celtic.
The exact words, you've traded immortality for mediocrity. Yeah. Well, he has put Leicester in a position to qualify for the Champions League again, and that will be an incredible achievement. And as Mary said, they are in with a chance of winning a trophy this season as well. And I just wonder, Celtic fans are as fanatical as those of any club in these islands. Have they softened on their stance around Brendan Rodgers, I wonder, over the last 15 months?
Guys, on that point, we'll have to draw close to it. We won't have time to get to Willie McCreary's piece, but racing starts tomorrow in Ireland. Naas gets underway. That was the hook for his chat with Philip Quinn, which is well worth a read as well on page 66. Mary O'Connor, CEO of the Federation of Irish Sport. Mary, thanks as ever. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
And Dave McIntyre, our Virgin Media Television. Hopefully you're back commentating very soon, Dave. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Joe.
Cheers, guys. That was the papers. We're taking a short ad break. News headlines on the way. In the next hour, Darren O'Dea is somebody I'd never really spoken to before. Very interesting fella. Came through at Celtic as a teenager. Has now had a fascinating career. We'll talk about that. And is very much focused on becoming a coach. He's with the Celtic under-18s at the moment. So Darren O'Dea on the way at 3.